So we are live.
This actually is going to be live on YouTube. I better be careful what I say.
It is going to be live on YouTube, and let me also record this session. A very warm welcome to all. It's a wonderful day. I feel excited and privileged to extend my warm welcome to all those people who are present here. I'm excited for the conversation we get to have today. Now, before we begin, just a little housekeeping before we start. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the chat box. You can also watch it on YouTube live stream. I'll bring them up in the conversation if necessary, or we will have time for questions in the end. To keep the quality of sound functional during the meeting, please mute yourself when you are not sharing. I may also mute the room if necessary, but please remember to unmute when you wish to share. Now, let me introduce our guest of honor. Our guest of honor is Miss Alice K. Boatwright. She is an award-winning American author, most widely known today for her popular Ellie Kent mysteries. Under an English Heaven, the first in this series of traditional mysteries set in England, was awarded the 2016 Mystery and Mayhem Grand Prize. The sequel, What Child Is This?, was published in November 2017. Excuse me. And the third book, Life Ever After, will be released in 2022. Alice studied fiction writing at Syracuse and Columbia universities, but for many years made her living as a writer about education, development, and public health. During this time, she was based in Europe for a decade and traveled extensively in Asia, although she has never been to Pakistan. Her experiences as an expat, as well as her lifelong love of English literature and culture, inspired her to begin writing her mystery series. Her amateur sleuth is an American woman, Ellie Kent, who marries an English vicar and moves to a village near Oxford. When she finds a body in the churchyard soon after her arrival, Ellie is accused of the murder and must draw on her past experiences as a literary researcher to solve this crime, as well as other mysteries. Alice also writes literary fiction. Her book, Collateral Damage, traces the impact of the Vietnam War on those who fought, those who resisted, and the families and friends caught between them. She has also published numerous stories in literary journals. Raised in New England, Alice moved to the West Coast and was a long-time resident of San Francisco before moving to Europe. Since 2014, she and her husband are back on the West Coast, but now live near Seattle, Washington. So now I'm going to hand everything to you, Miss Alice. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Jamshed, and welcome to everybody. Can you hear me all right? Okay, good. I am delighted to be here. It's such a privilege to be able to meet with you, and I'm very interested in the issue of why people read fiction, and I can talk about why I also write fiction, and I look forward to hearing about what you're reading and what you like or don't like about it, and what you wish you would find out of your fiction reading. But I think it's wonderful that you have a fiction book club. And I completely agree that the worse things get in the world, the more important fiction is. So it's a release and an escape, but it's also a way of bringing us together that has been proven to be enormously helpful through many centuries now, and in every culture. It takes different forms, but I think storytelling and learning to experience other lives and identify with is a critical part of life. Who would want to be only limited to the life they were actually living? And I think this is one of the reasons that I became a fiction writer was, I liked books when I was little. I read. I was not one of those children who always had her nose in a book. I would say, I've thought about this recently because that's what writers usually say is, oh, I was always reading. I was not always reading. What I really liked to do was to play, and to play dramatic games where I could be anybody I wanted to be, and I made up the story. So reading somebody else's story is one thing, but making up your own is a different thing. And I can really see, initially I thought because I had this interest in dramatic playing that I wanted to be an actress, go to Hollywood and whatever. And I tried that a few times, in school, and I discovered that the problem with being an actress is you can only be an actress, A, if someone's putting on a play, B, if someone invites you to play a certain part, and C, you have to play the part that they tell you to play and do it the way they want you to do it. And this did not suit me at all. So I left acting behind and I became a fiction writer where I get to play all the parts. I control everything. I design the costumes and the sets, and I control the weather and who wins and who loses and what the story is about. And it's actually a very, for people who want power, writing fiction is great. At least in your own mind, you have it all. So that was really how I got started. But I actually thought it would be helpful, on Twitter, of course, you may all be on Twitter, but I am also. And I thought when I was thinking about this meeting, I thought, well, I'll just ask people on Twitter, why do they read fiction? So I got some interesting answers, and I'll just read you a couple of them. One person said, stories have been a necessary part of my life for as long as I've been conscious. It's how I understand the world. I imagine how I might cope with different experiences in life. That goes for writing fiction as well. I figure out the world through stories. And another person wrote, I love to be in new places without the pain and expense of traveling. I love to imagine myself as someone else for a day or two. And another one said, it's partly an escape, partly to try on someone else's life. Would I like to be a pirate or in Florence at the turn of the 18th century? I also get new insights and viewpoints I'd never even considered. And I love to follow the story to the end. Another person says, I read fiction to feel truly alive, to find parts of my being that otherwise would stay in their caves. Fiction helps us to understand other people and teaches us compassion. Fiction is a materialization of love. So those were just some of the things that people thought. And, I feel like it's a lot of the world nowadays happens electronically, and there are all these fancy things that control you, to play this game. But when you're reading fiction, it all happens in your own head, and that you don't need any of this. It doesn't cost a lot of money. There are lots of ways, there's a library, there's nowadays, ebooks can be quite cheap. There's a lot of access to these stories, but you don't have to have a lot of fancy equipment. And the thing about fiction is every person who reads the book experiences it differently. It's a totally private experience. And so it's based on who you are, what you bring to the book, how you respond to the characters, how you react to the language or the style and the plot, and what you hope to see or find there. And what you experience is not the same as what the writer was writing either. So as a writer, it's very interesting because you are creating this world and you do your best to be specific and use the right word to convey the right experience to the reader. But actually, the reader will always read a different book than what you wrote, because the person who's writing it has all their experience in their mind and what they think they're saying. And so there's this magical sort of passing of ideas and feelings that happens between the writer and the reader, but it's all individual. When each of you read the same book, you are not going to experience it in the same way. And I think that's one of the things that's really moving about it. I was very touched that Jamshed really liked the story I wrote called No Prince, because it's actually only 100 words long. And I wrote it in part because the journal had this announcement, we're looking for stories that are 100 words long. And I thought, well, that's a challenge. How do you tell a story in 100 words? But actually, I'm going to read the first one first, which was actually written first, called The Screaming Woman. So, sorry, I should have made that more clear. So I had written this, I thought, what am I going to do for this 100-word story? And I thought about this piece that I had written a while back, which was called The Screaming Woman. And it was 5 anecdotes from a time when I worked in a psychiatric hospital. And so the first one of these 5 anecdotes was called The Screaming Woman. And it's very short. It starts off, white hands flutter from the window high above the ground. They hover in the air, reaching for the sky, then fall to the sill, limp. The curve of a pale forehead is pressed against the bars. A querulous voice begins a litany of complaints that rises slowly in intensity. The long white fingers begin to drum on the sill, then leap to clutch the bars with fierce knuckles as the woman begins to scream. I happen to really like this, but it's not a story. It's an introduction. And it was written as an introduction to these other anecdotes. And but it really is like the opening scene is sort of a static photograph, really, of this woman at the window screaming. And it's not a complete thing that can stand on its own. So when I decided to try to write this, I thought, I'm going to try to turn this into a story. And that's when I moved into writing No Prince. So if you can switch the image. So No Prince, you'll see, is very, very similar, but there are some quite different things about it. So this is the one that was published that Jamshed saw. No Prince. On a bright, hot summer morning, white hands flutter from a window on the top floor of the old state hospital. They hover in the air, reach for the sky, then fall to the sill, limp, disappear, return. Long strands of hair blow in the breeze as a pale forehead is pressed against the bars, and a querulous voice begins a litany that rises slowly in intensity. When will you come? Pale fingers drum on the sill, then leap to clutch the bars with fierce knuckles as the woman begins to scream. When will you come? When will you come? So one of the reasons why this is a story and the other one isn't is it has 2 characters, the woman and whoever, the title calls this person a prince, but you actually don't know. the term a prince, I don't know if you have the same kind of sort of legendary quality to the idea of a prince, but in the US, like the prince is the guy who's going to come and save you and take care of all your problems. So by putting that in the title, that specifies who that character is. But actually, it could be her father, her brother, her husband, her boyfriend, a doctor. It could be, she doesn't say that. The title says that. So the title sets your expectation that who she's longing for is someone she sees as someone who will save her. And so there's a conflict in the story. She wants something. This is basic to fiction, is that somebody wants something, and the story that develops is, in some ways, if you boil it down to the very simplest terms, will they get it or won't they get it? And what are the obstacles? In a long novel, there are lots of obstacles, and there's, you almost get it, then you don't get it, then you do get it, then you don't get it. And at the end, there's a resolution. Either they get it or they don't. In this story, it doesn't resolve, but I guess I feel like part of also the power of that word, the prince, is that you sort of figure it's not going to be resolved in her favor. That she's desperately longing for someone who is not going to come. So even though the person doesn't either come or not come in the story, you sort of go through that experience with her. And I think that's another thing about fiction, is it gives you a chance to experience things that you may not have to experience in your own life, or maybe you did, and you have that identification. And I was realizing when I went back and looked at this, that also, I don't know whether you would be familiar with Walt Disney or not, but when I was growing, the story of the Sleeping Beauty, you may have heard, but there's a Walt Disney movie about Sleeping Beauty. And in the movie, it's very sappy. I watched it on YouTube. It was embarrassing. But she sings this song about, someday my prince will come. And when I was a young girl, we used to joke about this and be like, oh, someday my prince will come, and it was humorous. But for me, and for in the context that I was writing, this has a whole resonance culturally that maybe not be familiar to you, but I realized I was thinking of that song, when she's hoping her prince will come. And of course, actually, probably for most of us, the prince didn't come. So might be a nice guy, but not a prince. So that's that. That also, the other thing was, you had asked me about my punctuation, Jamshed, and I thought, oh my God, my punctuation, what did I do? And I don't know, you could tell me later if this answers your question, but in looking at it again, it's so short, but by having the words, the single words with the spaces, it's almost like these are each scenes. So it extends the time that you're thinking and experiencing the story kind of way beyond the narrow scope of the 100 years. So actually, I think there's quite a bit packed into this little bit. But thank you for reading it, and thank you for letting me know that you liked it, because it actually gave me the chance to go back and think about it. So those are some of the things that I think are essential to fiction and make it important, is that it's just an opportunity to vicariously walk through conflict and resolution. We're all trying to figure out how to do our lives, maybe how to get what we want, and so it's a kind of role playing that you can see how someone who may seem to be braver or smarter or stupider than you, what they tried to do and how it turned out. And you can apply that to your own life. It's not didactic, but it is instructional in a different kind of way. And I think it also, especially now, I haven't been able to travel at all, not even out of Seattle in 2 years. So it's very, very nice. I come down to my office. This room is in the basement of my house. And I go to England. It's like, to heck with Seattle. I'm going to spend the day in England working on my Ellie Kent books. Or I can read and go somewhere else, and we could see a lot more of the world if we read fiction than if we just are stuck with our own worlds. So what else did I want to say? I think one of the worst things a writer can do. So there's a writer named John Gardner. He's been dead quite a long time now, but he wrote some books, very well-regarded books about writing fiction, and he also wrote a lot of novels. And he would talk about the fictional dream, and that when you open a book and you enter that world, you're in the fictional dream. And that from a writer's standpoint, you have to be very careful that you don't do anything that knocks the person out of that dream and makes them realize, they're where they are, what they're doing, they lose that thread. And once they lose it, they start to lose confidence in the writer. But also they have to work to go back into that dream. And sometimes, sometimes the things that writers do that make that happen, or they don't do it on purpose, but if there are a lot of different kinds of mistakes that can drop you out of the dream. One of them is a typo. You're reading along, there's a typo, a typographical error in this word. It's like you're immediately thinking about the typographical error instead of the story. But also if sometimes these things do happen. This person is called Jim in chapter 1, and suddenly in chapter 4, he's called John. It's like, hey, wait a minute. Or that there's some kind of error of fact. I read a book by a writer who's very well regarded, and his book is a huge success. And I was reading it. It's set in 1950 in Mumbai, then called Bombay. And I read this fact that he said about 1950, and I thought, that isn't right. That's wrong. And so immediately, the book is aside, I'm on Google, I'm going to prove that I'm right, that he's wrong. That totally undermined my experience of the book. Poor guy, I'm sure he's heartbroken. But so factual mistakes, mistakes of sequencing, you have to be really careful because you want to protect that experience for the reader, that they don't fall out of the dream. But it's also very interesting as a writer. Like one of the things that people will say to me about my mystery set in England, and I did live in England for 4.5 years, so I kind of know what I'm talking about. But I'm always surprised when they say, oh, I felt like I had a holiday in England. I was right there. And I'm thinking, really? Because I'm not one of those writers who likes to write really long descriptive passages, and I can tell you what every bird who's singing, what it is and what the plants are and everything. I'm just not that good at that kind of detail. I try to compensate by research, but I'm always thrilled that my 3 or 4 sentences that I wrote managed to be enough to convey to the person a whole experience of being in England. And it really is, if you sort of pull back and look at what you're reading and say, how much did that writer actually say? And how much did it just open up a world in my own mind? It's pretty extraordinary. And I actually, when I read a book that has lots, like pages and pages of description or too much detail, I start skipping. So it just doesn't interest me. Every detail about what a house looked like and what every piece of furniture looked like. Sometimes, in fact, I would say a lot less is more. Really what you're trying to do is give the person the experience as deftly as possible. But, there's a whole range of styles. Some people are people who want to paint a mural. Some people want to paint a really detailed oil painting, really big. Other people want to just do a pencil sketch. And the pencil sketch could say as much to you as the mural. It's just a matter of taste and style and what you want to bring to it. So that's really most of what I have to say. I was also going to talk about the fact that when you're reading, and Jamshed was saying, what do I look for when I'm reading? And did I have any particular recommendations about how to read, so to speak? I started thinking about, with a mystery, so this is one of my mysteries. This one is the second one. It's set at Christmas time. So they're both set in the same village. So they have similar covers, but this one is set in autumn. So it has the autumn leaves, and this one is set at Christmas. And the one I'm writing now is set in the spring. So my goal is with these books to write 4 books. I'm not planning a long series. I'm not Agatha Christie. I'm very slow. But what I want to do is write 4 books about the first year of this woman's life in England. So 1 each season. And they are mysteries, and I love mysteries. But what really interests me is much more. Like I'm trying to write about, like, what is it like to be an expat? What is it like to, you love this man, you marry him, and suddenly you're living in England and you think, wait a minute, now I'm going to live in England forever with these weird English people? Probably in every culture, there are a lot of people who've experienced that in different ways. Sometimes it's just suddenly you're married into a family that you think, what was I thinking? But so I want to write about, what is home? How does some place become home? And what does it mean to be at home? And I want to write about what it's like to get married. I've been married twice. I'm still married. But the first year of marriage is not like my prince has come. The first year of marriage is challenging. And so to look at that honestly, and these people love each other and they're nice people, no major personality defects, but it's still a challenge. And also because she's not really religious and she married a vicar. That was a little bit of possibly a mistake. But so I'm very interested in, like, what role does faith play in our lives? And does it work? And, and who has it and when? Because I think it's interesting that the vicar is not always the person who has the perfect faith. And so these are like the themes that interest me that go through the 4 books, 2 written, the 3rd one's almost finished, the 4th one's still to write. And I'm thinking of them now as kind of like a whole thing in 4 parts. So anyway, I was going to read you, is it getting too late? I thought I would read you just a little bit of what.
Yeah, not at all. Please go ahead.
Okay, I thought I'd read you a little bit of the opening and then talk about, maybe you can tell me, what do you think the rest of the book is going to be about? Because the opening of the book, pretty well when you start a book, whether you're really going to want to read it or not. And so what expectations are set up? And for a writer, it's very important. If you set up an expectation on page 1, you better fulfill that expectation. So I'll read you a tiny bit, then you can tell me what you think it was about or what you think will happen. And this book is set at Christmas. So the season that we're in here now. And it starts off on December 22nd, which in my fictional year was the winter solstice. It's not always that. But, so What Child Is This is the title. That's actually the name of a Christmas carol. So, but it has a nice, it sounds good for a mystery, don't you think? Tuesday, December 22nd, winter solstice. Chapter 1. All we want for Christmas is our Anthea. The missing posters were tacked to every telephone pole on the high street of Little Beecham. The message in bold red type created a plaintive contrast to the evergreen swags and fairy lights that decorated the honey-colored limestone cottages and shops of the Cotswold village. Ellie Kent could only imagine the need that had driven someone to hang them on a day like this, when the temperature had been dropping steadily from raw to bitter cold, and now it was snowing. The swirling flakes that made the village look like an enchanted snow globe were quickly puckering the signs. There were more shoppers about than usual, but they hurried past without a glance, heads bent against the storm, eager to be home for their tea. It was only 3 o'clock, but the turn toward dusk had begun. Ellie tightened her grip on her own packages and leaned in for a closer look at the photo of a slim, dark-haired young woman. It showed her laughing with her arms spread wide as if to embrace the world and her future. A student at Oxford, the poster said. Name, Anthea Davies, age 20. Last seen 1st October in Oxford. She studied the face and felt an uncomfortable twinge of recognition. Anthea Davies looked a lot like she had at that age. All we want for Christmas is our Anthea. Please help. The number was local. But there was really nothing she could do to help, Ellie told herself as she walked quickly away. She had only moved to Little Beecham from San Francisco in the autumn, and still had trouble navigating the winding lanes from there to anywhere. She was more likely to get lost herself than to find a missing person. Still, she couldn't help wondering what had happened to Anthea, whose joyful confidence had taken her down some wrong road. That was another thing Ellie recognized. As she approached the vicarage, a rambling Georgian brick house that stood at the end of the high street next to the church, she turned her focus back to the challenge she had already taken on, what she had come to think of as the 40 days of Christmas. When she was younger, she had always enjoyed Christmas, but since the end of her first marriage, admittedly a major wrong road, she had limited her holiday celebrations to the obligatory party for the English department at the university where she taught. Chinese food with friends on Christmas Eve, and Christmas Day with her parents, where they ate turkey and exchanged books. She had fantasized about Sunday spending this time of year in England, the place she had studied for so long, imagining an idyllic season of frosty winds and candlelit Christmas trees, roasting chestnuts and pink-cheeked carolers, flaming puddings and the appearance of a ghost or three. Now she was here, and it was even snowing, but she was not on a vacation. 4 months ago, she had married Graham Kent, the vicar of Little Beecham's Church of St. Michael and All Angels, and that meant she was in for what she jokingly called the full English when it came to Christmas. Today was day 25, starting from the church's annual Christmas coffee morning. With 15 days to go until the 3 kings would arrive in Bethlehem and the season would be over. Today, at least, she could cross off one big item on her to-do list. She had settled on her family gifts, which she purchased after endless rumination at the village antique shop, the Chestnut Tree. Her friend Michael John Parker owned the shop, and he had congratulated her roundly on her final choices: an antique rosewood fife with brass fittings for Graham, and delicate Victorian earrings for his daughter, her new stepdaughter, Isabel. "I hope now you'll begin to relax and enjoy yourself," said Michael John as he handed her a gift bag embossed with a spreading chestnut tree. "You should be excited. I'm sure the Kent family Christmas will be just like one of those illustrations in Dickens that we all love so much." "I am excited," said Ellie. "I'm just having trouble seeing myself as part of the picture instead of looking at it." "Put on your paper crown, say, 'Please pass the bread sauce,' and you'll fit in perfectly." "Bread sauce," said Ellie. "Isn't that an oxymoron?" He laughed. "Oh, you do have a lot to learn," he said, and wished her luck. She thanked him for his help and for the luck, both of which she surely needed. Even Graham, who appeared to love Christmas unreservedly, had looked tired that morning, hunched over his typewriter, banging out yet another sermon conveying the world-changing importance of one long-ago birth to people addled with more immediate expectations, both good and bad. "All we want for Christmas is our Anthea. Please help." So
Excellent.
what do you think the
Excellent.
story will be about?
So you showed the conflict in the form of a missing person. So that is the conflict, and it is going to be resolved or not during the course of your fiction. So that's amazing. And I wanted to answer some of your questions that you
Okay,
raised.
sure.
Yeah, you talked about Prince, and definitely, yes, we can relate to Prince. Since we don't have a strong tradition for democracy, so
Okay.
we have this tendency of someone saving our country. We rely on one person, right? Because we don't have democratic, the democratic foundations.
Right.
And another thing you mentioned about faith, yes, we have a lot of it, and faith of any kind, I think, is important. And as the Sapiens author Yuval Noah Harari says, that it's not the traditional faith. Any kind of faith is very important, right? Yeah. So these were the two things that were in my mind, and we have a lot of questions as well.
Oh, good. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Right.
The first question is from Dania. She is our fiction book club member from Salim Habib University. She wants to know what kind of challenges you faced when you decided that you are going to, have a career as a writer, or the first time you thought that you are going to write something for public. So, what was the reaction of your family, your friends? What were the challenges that you faced?
I think, my family, my parents were both musicians, so they
Oh.
were not surprised that I would choose something that didn't look like it had a very stable income attached. And I never expected to make money off my fiction writing. Although, when I graduated, I went to Columbia for my graduate degree. And of course, I imagined I would write my first book and, some publisher would fall in love with me and call me a genius and I would be on my way. That did not happen. It took me many years to publish my first book. And that was disappointing, but it was also good because by the time that book was published, I had worked on it over a very long period of time and I had grown up a lot and it changed a lot. So I essentially took two paths. One was I always wrote fiction. And in the beginning, I didn't expect, you always hope. Of course, you hope the prince will come, right? I thought, the New Yorker, I'd get a movie, my book would be a movie, I'd win an Oscar. These were the things that I would have liked to have happen, and they might still if I live long enough. But I think you have to be willing to separate those kind of fantasies that we all, I thought in America, there's a sort of legend about how if you sit in Hollywood and you sit in the right drugstore, you're going to be discovered. And I thought, or else, that someone would throw fairy dust and I would suddenly be famous. Well, the fact of the matter is, if you want to write a book, there's only one way to do it. And that is one word at a time, and then one sentence, and then one page. And you have to keep going, and you have to think about what you want. This is your book. You write what you want to write, and you do it as well as you can. And I have never been able to be a kind of fiction writer who would write to the market. And actually, my books are published by small presses, so I don't work under a deadline that says you're going to write a book every year, and it's just not my personality. But so in response to that, I sort of segued, and I ended up making my living my whole life as a writer. So the No Prince was written when I was running a newspaper in a psychiatric hospital. I did that. I worked in a library. I worked in a bookstore. I worked in a children's museum where they have exhibits, and I created the exhibits, and I wrote all the material that went with them. That was like playing. I enjoyed that a lot. And then I actually got a little bit more grown up, and I went to work at the University of California as an editor. And I learned a lot about editing skills, and I wrote for the development office. So, I used my skills to help raise money for health science research and scholarships. And, I think when people say they want to be a writer, they have a very narrow idea about what that might mean. And I'm really happy that I was able to use my talents in so many different ways while I was still, doing my little private thing over here. And when I went to Europe, I worked writing about public health. So I was working with an organization that was focused on lung health and tuberculosis, which are huge problems in the developing countries. And people here think, oh, tuberculosis, that was like Charlotte Bronte, right? They don't realize tuberculosis could be you at any moment. So, I feel like I had a very, very fulfilling career as a writer. And then I did publish my first book, finally. This is the one about Vietnam. Vietnam is not a popular topic, especially here. I don't think anywhere. But this was my generation growing up. And I loved writing this book. And the third part of it is set in Vietnam. And I was fortunate enough to be able to go there because of my other work.
Okay.
So this was a long journey, but I got to do it, and it won a prize. I won an award.
Excellent.
So it's worth it. I didn't make any money, and it isn't a movie yet, but we can still hope.
Okay.
When this one wasn't selling, and I thought, well, I better write something that people like to read. So I wrote a mystery. And this book actually has sold extremely well. I forgot to put this one won a prize too. But so actually I have experienced what it's like to have your book make money. People you don't know are reading it and saying they like it. And that is very exciting. So I am glad I now don't do that other kind of writing. I only do fiction. But, no matter what, if you just keep writing and just keep trying to find what you want to say, you'll have written something, and that's always worth it. It's always worth it, no matter what. That was a long answer.
No, we wanted such type of answers. One of the questions from Sania, she is herself a writer, a budding writer. Her question is, what's your favorite underappreciated write-up?
Oh gosh, I wanted to be sure to tell you not about underappreciated. I'm not sure. Well, there's a man named William Gass, Gass. He's now died, but I was fortunate enough to meet him a few times, and he he's a very literary writer, but he's a brilliant man and very creative. And he never made any money, I don't think. He was very respected by other writers, but he was not, his work is a little bit too challenging, I think. But I wanted to tell you, tell you about the person who wrote one of my all-time favorite books. And she's not underappreciated. She's won a lot of prizes, but she's only written one book. And her name is Deepa Anappara. Have you heard of her?
No, I haven't.
Oh my God, you have to read this book. The first book is called The Gin Patrol on the Purple Line. That's DJINM. It's set in Mumbai.
Okay.
And it's just the most brilliant, funny, sad, amazing story. And she's actually from Kerala originally.
Okay.
She's a journalist writing about poverty in India for a long time. And she wrote this book. And this book is a brilliant example of why all these people who say you should only write, if you're a woman, you can't write it, be a man. And if you're this, you can't be that. And you should only write about in your own little silo. Because the protagonist of this book is a boy. She's a woman, a grown woman. And she writes this incredible story about a boy living in the slums of Mumbai. It's a mystery, it's funny, she knew her subject very well. She had to know that kind of community very well. But she takes you completely into the world of these slums around the high rises of Mumbai. And this boy is looking for one of his friends who disappears, and nobody cares, but he cares. So I think it came out last year. And actually, I also noticed, I looked up, there's another book coming out in 2023 that she has worked on with some other people. And it's an anthology of essays examining the craft of writing through the lens of race and culture. And it's called Letter to a Writer of Color. And it will feature authors from around the world and will ask readers to think differently about how they read non-white, non-Western stories.
Okay.
So that's her next project. I'm sure she's also writing more fiction too. But
okay, excellent. And another question related to what you said, that you don't like being forced a deadline. So regarding that, Kalpana, she used to be one of our members of Fiction Book Club, but because of some her busy schedule or something whatnot, she's now not a member of our Fiction Book Club. But she wants to know that do you think writing whenever you feel like is better than writing consistently according to a timetable?
oh, that's a tough. I think it's better to write consistently. I can't say I always do it, but I actually have found when I was working, so I lived in San Francisco, but I worked in Berkeley, which is across the San Francisco Bay. So it was about an hour commute. And I used to get up in the morning and I would work on my book every morning before I left for work, because I knew that if I didn't, I would never have time to write. And I have actually found it harder since I don't have a job. And you sort of think, oh, I can do it, but I'll start the laundry first. Or, I personally have found it hard to maintain the same kind of discipline when I have a lot of choice about the time. And I know that when you sit down and do it, your brain follows your body.
Yes.
Your body does not follow your brain.
Yes. Okay, so another question is from Hafsa from Salim Habib University. She wants to know, she herself is a content writer. She does freelancing job. So she can also relate with your, having a time and this sort of stuff. So she wants to know, do you ever suffer from writer's block? Would love to know how to keep writing regularly.
Okay. I have never I've never called it writer's block. I have definitely had periods where I was struggling to find my way to the next point in the story. But I think usually when a lot of times, one thing that will help me is to go back and reread something that I wrote that I liked. It sort of reminds me that this is really, writing is the thing that's the most fun, but it's also the hardest. And so to sort of get back into my writer hat and to have a few good feelings about myself, and then to go back in. I don't think you ever solved writer's block by not writing. Any writing that you do. And there's a great book that really helped me called Becoming a Writer. It's an old Becoming a Writer. It's an old book written by a woman who taught writing, I think. But the thing about it, it's not about how to write, it's about how to become a writer. And one of the how to develop the skills and the habits that make it possible to do this, to have time to write and to get the words down onto paper. Just good tricks. I'm sure there are a million other ones, but that's the one I liked.
Okay. I have another question from Sania. She wants to know that, do you want each book to stand on its own, or are you trying to build a body of work with connections between each book, just like your Ellie Kent series, but first you showed your book Collateral Damage. So what's your goal,
My work as a whole, I don't know that I've thought about it that way. I have definitely found myself more happy working on the mysteries now that I have an overarching idea of what I want the whole thing to be. I'm not a person who can crank out story. I need something a little bit. I need some guidance. This book is actually 3 novellas that were written at very different times, and it took a long time to suddenly see. I thought of them as a triptych. You know, a triptych, like 3 paintings that are different, but they have something that pulls them together.
Yeah.
And I loved that. That was very exciting to see these 3 things come together and sort of resonate off each other. And if these things work together, probably there's, my style, my voice. There's certain, at a more meta level, the things I care about come through, because I always am writing about what I care about.
Excellent.
So I'm working on putting together a collection of short stories that are all written, and it's hard to think, like, does this make any sense? But I did this little book. These are 3 short stories, all written at different times, but they have a common setting. These are the islands off the state of Washington. Excellent. And this was fun. This made sense because these are 3 that go together. But how do all 4 of these things go together? I'm waiting for my biographer to tell me. You tell me.
I think you are doing a wonderful job. I'm at midway of the Under an English Heaven. So I'm really enjoying with this Ellie Kent character. And my next question is related to that, but it is Alamsha who asked this question. Do you think you would get along with the character Ellie Kent if you met her?
Yes, I do. I think I would.
But not her husband.
Well, her husband is based on a man that I knew.
Okay.
Not my husband.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I think I would like her husband. They're both me, of course, I'm the one playing all the roles.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Okay, another question is same, Alamsha. It's what comes to you first, the characters or the plot?
Oh, that's good. The characters, I think.
Characters. Okay.
You know, in writing a murder mystery, there are a lot of different philosophies about writing murder mysteries. And I always know who's going to be murdered.
Okay.
Some people don't, which I just can't even understand that. They'll write the whole book and say, and I just figured out who did it. Or somebody else gets murdered instead of the person. I don't understand that. But I do not write from an outline.
Okay.
And the characters are what is of enduring interest to me.
Okay. So another question related to this point is from Aida. She is from Dow University, my previous university, and she is doing a wonderful job convening our weekly meetings. Her question is, from where do you get inspiration for your creative process? You said it was characters. So what happens? What clicks? What happens?
Let's see. Ideas come from all different places. And actually, Agatha Christie said this, but I totally agree that one of the best places to get ideas is when you're washing the dishes. Now, you might not agree with that, Jamshed. But I think there's something about having your hands in hot water that sort of puts you into a place, or taking a walk.
Okay.
A shower also is a good place. Sort of pulls you out of your life, you know, to allow the rumination to begin. And then while I'm working, I have ideas. So my process is very, I've been trying to think about this because I'm trying to sort of figure out, okay, now I've done this enough times, I should have a more organized approach. But actually my personality and style is not very organized. And so, but I think about it a lot in sort of like filmic terms. You know, that there's so much you have to pull together in terms of the setting and the characters, and in each scene, it's like, what are they going to say? Okay, it's easy to write dialogue, blah, blah, blah. Okay, but how are they saying it? And how is the action? And what is the purpose? You can fill up thousands of pages without going anywhere. So, you know, what is the purpose of this scene and how does it fit into the whole thing? And when I start getting engrossed in all of that, then, you know, the ideas start percolating too. The links.
Excellent.
Things.
So there is creativity inherent in doing some boring work, right? Mundane work.
Yes. Knitting, cleaning.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Another question is from Sania again. How do you select names of your characters? Because I recently read a few of the work of Kurt Vonnegut. So his names of his character were very different from yours, and you can also quote a lot of writers. So how do you select names of your characters? Easy to remember or what?
I have a friend who names all of his characters after people who played on some baseball team long ago. I don't do that. And some people use the telephone book, you know, we don't have telephone books anymore, but we used to have a book, you know, you could look up names, and I don't really know. I just think and they come to me, and I don't often change them the main characters anyway, I don't usually, somehow the name comes. Sometimes with a minor character, I might change their name, but I'm not a person who likes really quirky names like Charles Dickens. You know, his names are very illustrative of they direct you how to think of the person. So I try to be more neutral. I don't give the villain, you know, a name that's going to say, this is the villain.
Okay.
I don't know.
So another question is from Dania again. She wants to know, do you have the conflict resolved in your mind when you start writing, or you just let it hang there and just go with the flow?
I like the exploration. I know, the thing about a murder mystery that makes it easier to write than, say, a literary fiction where anything could happen anywhere, anytime. With murder mystery, somebody dies, there's a process of trying to find out. There's a sort of overarching community. There's a stable community at the beginning that is disrupted by the murder. And that by the end of the story, stability has to be restored. The community has to be restored. So you have that natural arc to build off of. And the book I'm writing now, what I started off with, I still don't quite know how that central idea is going to appear in the final book. But it was, I was very curious about, most books, they end, the murder gets caught. The books I write are called traditional mysteries or cozy mysteries, which means there's very little of any kind of bloodshed, no big sex, no big violence, not a lot of swearing. They're more, the traditional ones are more like Agatha Christie, the mysteries that were written in England at the beginning of the 20th century. So often like set in a village, or there's a locked room, people are in a country house and they're all snowed in, or they're on an island. So there are certain sort of structural elements that you can use to build your story off of. But what I wanted to write about was, I have a character who was convicted of murder 15 years ago and has now returned to the village. And I'm curious about, like, if you do something so devastatingly bad, how do you live with yourself? How do you go forward in your life? And how, you're still alive. If you don't live in a place where you have the death sentence, then you're still alive and somehow you have to keep living. So that was very interesting to me. But the book is sort of gone in different directions, and there are other things about it that are more interesting to me now than that. So I'm sort of trying to ride the wave and see where I'll end up at the end.
Okay.
I like that. I like that's part of it is, you leap on your surfboard and you go. You don't know, are you going to go under, or are you going to ride safely to the beach?
Excellent.
I'm not a surfer. I'm just making that up. I've seen it on TV.
Yeah, you are a fiction writer. You can do anything and everything.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so do you have any questions for us?
Well, I'd love to hear more about what you're writing or reading.
Okay, that's a very difficult question. I start multiple books at one time because I run 2 fiction book clubs. So I try to keep it separate, but sometimes they do overlap. So this is our side of the story. And but we are more interested in you. So do you start multiple books when you start reading?
No. Although right now I have one type of book that I read right before bed that's I know isn't going to shock or scare me. And then I'll read something more adventurous during the day, or I'll read nonfiction during the day. But no, I like to read them one at a time. Fiction, I like to pretty much read one at a time.
Okay.
So what are some of the books your club has read?
Sorry?
Does your club read one book and then discuss it? Is that?
No. We just may make a promise that we will read one fiction in a week. Oh. And then we will, and we summarize it in 5 minutes. So that is our job.
Okay.
Yeah. And with our Dead Poets Society, we have to select a piece of poetry of a dead poet. So these are the things that we are doing.
Oh, great. You have seen that movie probably, right?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Great movie.
It's a great movie.
So can somebody tell me what is a book they read this past week?
Yeah, my my club members can mention it in the chat box.
Okay.
Yeah, in October we had a Russian Authors Month.
Oh, I love
Yeah,
what
so we
you
got a
like.
chance of. I had an audiobook by Nikolai Gogol,
Hmm.
so I was putting it off. So I got that chance of finishing that entire series of short stories.
Okay.
So I went with the Nikolai Gogol, and the other selected Leo Tolstoy and Fyodor Dostoevsky's and others.
Okay.
So this is a little attempt that we are doing
Right.
over here.
Oh,
Okay, so
40 Rules of Love. Okay. Did you like it? 40 Rules of Love?
either you can unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, am I audible? Okay. Yeah, I liked it. Basically, Rumi, I get a lot of inspiration from Rumi. So it was related to Rumi, so I got excited and I read it all in one go, no?
Right.
So yeah, that is. And Agatha Christie, you named Agatha Christie. I'm a big, I should say, a fan of her. Mystery books. Yeah, I am. Mystery books are my favorite. One of my favorite area in fiction. So yeah, that's all I have to say.
Okay.
And it was good meeting you, and it was good hearing from you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm more interested in the part you read, and I'll surely read it. Inshallah. Thank you.
Okay, so another club member says The Stranger by Norman Whitney, and the other is The Visitors by Ray Bradbury.
Okay. I am not a reader of science fiction, so I prefer my imaginary worlds to be more based on the one that we live in. But
Okay.
I did like Tolkien. I've read The Lord of the Rings.
Okay.
I did read, I've read a little bit, but it's not my go-to.
Okay, but still this science fiction, it projects a lot of the realities that we are facing today,
It's
right?
true. 1984, welcome to
Yes. But have you read this book? You must have read this book, Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Portman.
I haven't.
So it's his thesis. He compares 1984 versus Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. And his thesis is we live in a brave new world, not in a 1984 world. So it's entire thesis of that book. So that was an interesting, book to listen to.
I will write it down, Amusing Ourselves to Death.
Yeah, it's an old book. I think it was written in 1980s, I guess, but it is very relevant to today.
Okay.
Yeah, he talks about television, but the entire thing applies to YouTube and all the social media. So it's an interesting book.
I think it's interesting to think about the proliferation of ways of amusing yourself to death electronically.
Yeah, and we prefer things that entertain us. Whether they're right or wrong, it's a secondary thing. It must entertain us. It should look good, and it should say things in a way that can entertain us. So it is being a teacher, I can relate to it. I need to entertain my class as well.
Yeah, you have to put the sugar on the pill.
Yes.
But, I have always thought that one of the nice things about reading is it is so private. If you think about all the people all over the world turning on their YouTube or their Twitter or their TV show or streaming something, like all these people are all doing the same thing.
Yes.
And they're getting the same images that someone else has controlled into their brains, and it influences how we think and feel. And if you're reading a book, it's like I alone have decided to read this book, and I'm having
Yes.
a private experience. And I feel like that's
Yes.
more, it develops your brain in a different way.
Yes.
That's,
Yes.
I'm not a doctor, but.
And it helps build the train of thought, because we live in an era which this book says, Neil Portman says in his book, Amusing Ourselves to Death, there is an entire chapter on now this. So you don't need to develop a train of thought. Now this, get entertained. Now this, it is a shocking news. Now this, it is again an amusing news. So we are having breadth of a lot of emotions, but not the depth. So this is what we are missing. Where when you mention Ellie Kent and her emotions, so it's a thing that many people may not be able to relate to, because they want a new emotion again emerging right in the next paragraph. So this is I think a flaw, right?
Yeah. I think that I think there's a whole thing that has developed around people's attention span in
Yes.
television that has to take 12 minutes, or probably it's only 7 or 8 minutes now, because there's
Yeah.
more ads. And so the whole way a story develops, or the way a character is presented, is that
Yes.
I think one of the people who read Ellie Kent when I used to have an agent in New York. She
Okay.
left the business to have children, but
Okay.
when I sent her Ellie Kent, she had someone read it for her, and
Okay.
said, well, this is sort of like a carriage ride, isn't it? She wanted a jet propelled, boom, boom, boom.
Yes.
Wrong writer. I'm never going to be writing that book. But a lot of, a lot of publishers and a lot of readers want something to happen every.
Yeah.
So it's okay. But when we see ads on television for the movies that they're making now, who is watching? Things are exploding and bodies
Yes.
flying, and it's like, well, this is what people want, to be entertained by that. Wow.
Yes.
I'll take a nice quiet story like War and Peace.
But it's a difficult read, don't you think?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. We have that kind of a reader among us. She is Sania. She is our Salim Habib University student. She has this ability to read for hours.
That's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. Sania, would you like to ask any question, or would you like to say something? Sania, you can unmute yourself.
I just wanted to ask, like, you've published books and then they're a little famous now. So do you read the reviews, or do you take criticism and you would want to shape the next book with respect to the criticism that has been given to you?
I do read all my reviews, and most of them are good, so that makes it easy, but some of them are not. And it's always a bit shocking, and takes a little while to just shake it off and say, well, everybody has an opinion, and it's kind of amazing that, one person loves something and somebody else is like, rips, this is garbage. And so you kind of just have to get tough. If you haven't gotten any bad reviews, you're not being read by enough people. You can
Excellent.
always tell on Amazon whose book has only been read by the family and friends. Those are the books that have all 5 stars. It's true.
Yes. Yeah, that's true.
I also wanted to ask, have you read anything that made you think differently about fiction?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Have you read anything that had made you look or think differently about fiction?
Well, Deepa Anappara's book inspired me so much. I just was dazzled by what she did. And technically, her style, it's just a brilliant, brilliant book. But Also read a book recently by an American writer named Elizabeth Strout, Strout. And she won the Pulitzer Prize for a book called Olive Kittredge, which I have not read yet. But another one of her books was called, thank you, My Name is Lucy Barton. I read this book. I felt like it sort of felt like it was about me, but it felt like in a parallel universe, I could have written that book, or I wish I could have written that book. It was just beautiful. And so, I don't know, there are books that you read that are just like, you know, eating potato chips or French fries, you know, you just like, you want French fries, you eat French fries. But when you want a really fine meal, it's a different thing, right? And they both have their role to play. So you have to decide. I mean, it's perfectly fine if you want to be a French fry writer. That's your thing, go for it, you know. But you can be whoever you want. When you're writing, you can be whoever you want. You can be you can be the prince.
That she is waiting for, right? So Alamsha is the co-host of today's meeting. So I will request her to unmute herself and she might want to ask a question.
Okay, I really wanted to ask, when you write a book, so do you use a typewriter, or do you use, like, you write by hand? Like, what do you prefer when you write? I wanted to know that.
I used to write by hand originally, but then, and for many years, I only had a manual typewriter. And, you know, back in the ancient of days, when you submitted a story, it had to be typed, and it had to be typed perfectly. And I was a terrible typist. So I would have to type and type and type. And they didn't even want you to make any corrections. You know, it was like, and you had to send them the original. You couldn't send, so there was a lot of typing involved.
Okay.
So when the computer came along, first I did get an electric typewriter, and that was a little bit better. But the computer, if you're a lousy typist, the computer is a great saving. So I write mostly. I do keep a journal by hand. And I think the writing feels different when you write by hand. It happens a little differently. But I do write my books on a computer, and I don't print out very many copies. I usually will write quite a long time before I actually commit it to paper.
Okay. So there is some magic in writing by hand. I learned how to write by a proper teacher. He was an editor of a journal. So I got a training of how to write. So he asked me to write by hand.
Really?
So now I listen to you, and I think there is some magic in writing by hand. I think you are much more involved in it. Your visual skills and your brain and your muscles, they are all involved in something. So you can go much deeper. Maybe that may be the reason.
I think that's true. I think it's a different set of triggers that are happening. And when you're writing on a computer, I mean, it's so easy to just blah, 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 delete, blah, 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 blah. You know?
Yeah. Immediately.
They both have their place. I'm used to writing on a computer now. But
Okay.
I've been keeping a diary during the whole pandemic. And so that gets me writing by hand every day, and I like that.
Okay, that's great. Okay, let me ask Hamad, would you like to ask any questions? So now I'm going beyond my fiction book club.
Okay.
Hello, Miss Alice. I hope you're fine.
I am very well.
I just wanted to ask, how important is it to keep a fine line between reality and fiction?
How important is it to what?
To keep a fine line between reality and fiction.
Oh, I don't know. Well, in terms of genres now, they've gotten very mixed up. So I think there's what's called creative nonfiction. And people are writing, I think we are actually in a time, when they talk about disinformation. I mean, I guess when I'm writing fiction, I'm writing about made up characters. Some people write fiction that has real people in it. And that was started, that went back a few years. And sometimes that can be effective, but I like to make up the whole world myself. Although I do, now my village is a fictional village. It doesn't exist. And it's actually bigger than the village that I lived in. But I do blend the world. I mean, I have a real Oxford and a real London. There's some settings that are real, but I took a map actually, and I traced the map of the actual area, and then I figured out where my fictional villages were on the map. And that helped me to see them. I'm not sure I'm answering your question. Am I answering your question at all?
Ma'am, yes, you are, but I wanted to say that does reality disappoint you? Because you have a fictional world around in your mind, and does reality, it disappoints you?
Reality is always disappointing. No, I shouldn't say that. I mean, we live in a very difficult time. I feel like the last few years in the United States have been the most difficult period that I can remember, although everybody, thinks the 60s were so wonderful, and there were some pretty horrible things that happened then. So, it's all, I don't know. Life is, we're not in control of life, I think that's one of the basic things you have to learn. So fiction is a nice little hideaway. You can go in your little closet and you create your own world. Everything will be just the way you want it to be. It's wonderful. Then you open the door, you have to go out and deal with the real world as bravely as you can. I don't know.
Yeah. I know quite a few people who have made their princes, those people who are very beautiful and they are in the media. But when it comes to reality, they don't feel attached to anybody in the real world, because they are so fixed in the in the realm of fiction. So I think it is very important to stay connected with the real world. People who have blemishes on their faces and have a dark history or not. So I think it is very important to stay in the real world. It's just a general comment.
Yeah. I think that's a big difference between like American television and European English television. You see actual real looking people, they might be fat or their hair is perfect. In America, they don't look like real human beings. That's I don't watch those programs, so I'm speaking a little bit out of turn, but I think we need our entertainment to come from the real world.
Yes. Okay. And my final question. When you receive the invitation from a person living in Pakistan, what was your impression? And is there any message you want to give specifically to our fiction book club members, our students, and our country as a whole? As an outsider, what is your impression? And be honest with it.
Well, I have had several friends named Jamshed, so I was delighted to get your message. I was totally surprised. I mean, the journal that my story was in is a very small journal, I think, but I'm amazed that you found it. I'm delighted. I think that's one of the amazing things about online publishing. I used to publish in these paper journals. It was very nice. They were like a book. They smelled good, but nobody ever read them. And now my stories are published online and people all over the world read them. That's unbelievable. And they're there all the time and they're free. That's not answering your question. But, I have not been to Pakistan, but when I was a child, I lived in India for a year. And my father was a musician and he had a grant to teach at a college in Bombay. It was Bombay at the time. So I was very comfortable. And plus with my work about tuberculosis, we worked with all these countries and I did not happen to go to Pakistan, but I was very curious to see who would be there, and I'm delighted to meet all of you. I would just love to say I think you're fabulous, and I wish you well, and I hope, the women that I knew, so I was 11 when I lived in Bombay, and I went to a school called the Cathedral School, which is quite a famous school now, I think, but no, I was going to say Salman Rushdie went there.
Yeah.
So, he wrote Midnight's Children. And
yeah, I'm reading that.
Yeah, it's a fantastic book. But that was the beginning of my awakening. I was just an American schoolgirl, and the girls that I met there were already thinking about what they were going to do in their future. They were being educated. This was not a given for girls to be educated, and they were getting really excellent education. And they were already thinking about their Oxford. They were going to go to take the Oxford and Cambridge exams, and they wanted to be doctors. And I think Maya was like, I'm waiting for my prince to come. I didn't have a clue, and they were these amazing women. They grew up. I still am in touch with several of them. We had a Zoom reunion of our classmates from long ago, and they're all over the world now, and they've done all these amazing things. So it's a wonderful privilege to talk to a next generation. And I understand you're all studying pharmacy, and it's so important. We're all living in really difficult times in different ways, and I think I will be not at all surprised to be seeing your books or to hearing you have made, some important contribution to how your country goes forward. I think that the women everywhere need to be stronger, better at standing up.
Yes.
And women's rights are being challenged everywhere, and we just can't let that happen. We need to make our mark as best we can. But so I love having spent the evening with you, or the morning for you, and I'm so thrilled. I told my friends here, I'm going to talk to a book club in Karachi, and to me it's not that strange, because I worked internationally, and in my job we would have meetings. This organization was based in Paris, but the language of business was English, because there were people from everywhere. My colleagues came from everywhere. And that was a very, very exciting and important, to feel part of the world is really, especially nowadays, we're like in our screens, we're in our nationhood, everybody's looking at everybody else like they're other. So it's wonderful to be here. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. I can't thank you enough for sparing your precious time with us. And I hope we are going to talk about you for a lot of months to come, at least. You will be a hot topic in our university as well. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So I'm now going to...
I'll be happy to come again sometime if you want to.
Yeah, we'd love to have you. And we can work out the details of your schedule.
Okay,
Okay. Thank you very much.
Very much.
Now I'm going to end this meeting.
Okay.